Hey guys, I'm Yuruzi. This is part 5 of What If Naruto Grew Up with a Pack of Demons. Growing up with a pack of demons is easy, especially when the older he gets, the more a demon Naruto becomes. But when the pack is killed by shinobi, Naruto vows revenge by learning to use his ever-growing chakra. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and check out the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 19, Taking from Demons. Soren crouched anxiously in the tree, munching on a squirrel to keep his mouth moving. It was 3 hours ago that they had received Sunny's warning, and the whole ordeal made him nervous. Across from him, Diadem was curled around a few branches, looking for all intent and purpose like he was resting. Occasionally the wolf demon would stir or flex his claws around a branch, so no doubt he was really thinking, perhaps about something useful. He wasn't going to bother the greater demon, and thought to himself that he liked it better when he had thought the other was merely a lesser like he was. He did not enjoy being outclassed at all. I suppose I'll have to go in there and search for the youngling, Diadem stated suddenly, rising from the branch he was curled around. Soren frowned. And how will you do that? You're completely conspicuous. Yes. Diadem replied, turning his starlit eyes toward the brown demon, amusement marking his furred features. I suppose I would be, the blue demon said before flashing into the small blue flame and floated lazily through the trees toward Soren. How about now? Do I still stand out? The voice whispered mellowly through Soren's head as the greater demon floated before him. Soren snorted, rolling his shoulders before stopping the movement altogether. The source. I can feel your source. Do you think the humans will sense it too? The flame flickered slightly as if a wind had blown it before it floated into the tree and flashed back into the wolf form, the branches making a slight groan at the combined weight of the two demons. Diadem was the size of a pony. You're quite right, I'm afraid, Diadem replied in chagrin, wolf-like features drawn together in an attempt at a frown. Then he sighed. I fear I'll have to go as a human then. It is not a form I relish taking, I have never perfected it well, but the source is much easier to hide in that form. You shape-shift? Soren asked in curiosity. Few demons had the ability and all of them said to be masters. Diadem seemed startled by his question. Of course. Did you think the wolf form was my natural state? At Soren's accusing eyes he laughed, baring onyx teeth. No, youngling, I have no form. He flashed into the small blue flame, and Soren understood that this was Diadem's true form. He tried to hide his unease, for demons who had no solid form often had the ability to possess other demons and humans. They were not well looked upon. As the flame, Diadem began to grow, stretch, becoming brighter until Soren had to cover his eyes with a large hand. Peeking through his clawed fingers, he watched in awe as Diadem began to take the shape of a human male, wait, female. Diadem couldn't seem to decide as his human genitalia morphed between the two. It was a grotesque sight, and Soren was about to turn away when Diadem seemed to come to a decision and settled as a human male. The brightness faded, allowing Soren to drop his hand from his face and observe the human version of Diadem. It was still conspicuous. The human was about 6.5 feet tall with skin that was too white to be healthy and indigo-colored hair that rose in spikes and fell to his lower back. It was long of limb and slim of body, the fingers and toes were too long, the ears pointed like Sunny's. It was the face that was too eye-catching, narrow and dusted with light gray freckles, the lips were dark gray, his teeth remained black and his eyes were the same, completely black and dotted with those strange bright stars. He would stand out. Not so good, Diadem confirmed in demon tongue. I was never good at this form and the little human tongue I know will still sound terrible. But can you sense my source? At Soren's shake of head he gave a vulpine grin. Well, this is the best I can do. I'll find Sun and see what I can do to assist the youngling. He dropped down to the forest floor, but crumbled weakly into the leaves. He stood up, long limbs uncoordinated before he began to glide toward the human dwellings. Soren followed him from above and sneered in amusement. Just like that? He asked, and held back a laugh as Diadem stumbled over a protruding root as he looked up at him. You're going to walk into a human dwelling just like that? Diadem sent him a frown. I imagine that is why I took this form, yes. Soren stopped in a tree. You're going to walk into a human area without any human garments, he stated, wanting to clarify this, and watched as Diadem froze mid-step. The blue demon looked up at him. Blast! They decided to lure a human to them, which was a risky ordeal since they were so near the human dwelling and Soren wasn't exactly the best at it. However, they managed to snag a human male, who followed them into the cover of the forest. His clothing consisted of a light blue cloth over his torso and a gray cloth covering his legs. "We mustn't get blood on it," Diadem muttered, hovering over the dazed human before grabbing the cloth on its upper body and giving it a tug. There was a ripping sound and the blue demon immediately released the cloth. "How do we get these things off?" His voice held agitation, to Soren's silent amusement. It was apparent that the greater demon was out of his depth. Soren frowned and stared at the human as he hummed, and tried to remember the time Sunny had put on human garments for fun. "Put your arms up," he hummed, and the human lifted its arms. As delicately as he could, Soren gently pulled the cloth up over the human's arms and over its head until the cloth was free. He tossed it to Diadem, that proceeded to go through the process of removing the lower garments, until the human only wore the small white cloth around its waist. "Will I need that?" Diadem eyed the cloth disdainfully, for it was wrapped closely around the human male's genitalia. Soren shrugged and was content in watching Diadem struggle with the cloth and managed to hum the lure to keep the human entranced. The garments were too short for Diadem, his lower belly showed and the cloth came above his ankles. He eyed the leather strap to the human's feet, but it was clear that Diadem's feet were too long. Diadem walked in a circle, testing the limits of the garments before deciding he really didn't have much choice in the matter. "We'll eat the human," Diadem said, nodding toward it. "I must have the brain quickly so I can learn the human tongue." Soren raised his hairless brows in awe. It was hard to glean that much information from a creature, especially language, which encompassed a whole culture half the time. But Diadem was a master and under suspect of being the kind that could perform demonic possession. No doubt taking on a new language was part of the package deal. "We must eat everything, Soren. We won't be making past mistakes." His black eyes stared beseechingly at him. They made quick work of the human. Diadem actually managed to swallow the brain whole, distorting his human jaw and throat to accommodate the human brain. Soren then watched in fascination as the blue demon shuddered and twitched, eyelids fluttering, body shaking, information no doubt running through his brain at a painful speed. Then he froze, blinking several times before gracing Soren with a nasty grin. After that he disgusted him by consuming all the parts they found undesirable: kidneys, intestines, stomach, lungs. Soren by then simply turned his back and ate his leg in peace. They ate the bones and even consumed the hair, until a smear, the leather footwear, and the now crimson cloth was all that remained. "Well, I'm off now," Diadem said smoothly, stretching his human limbs and glided through the forest, stumbling every once in a while. Soren followed him from above, until he exited the cover of the trees and happened upon the road. A few humans that were heading for the human dwelling stared at the tall demon, taking in his appearance before losing interest. Soren sighed in relief. Apparently he didn't look as strange as he imagined. Now all they had to do was get past the humans at the walls. He would use the lure for a distraction. Then it was up to Diadem not to attract negative attention. Soren sighed once again. When had life become so complicated? Soren managed to do his part with that curious technique he called the lure. It was clearly a bloodline technique, passed down from the ones that sired Soren's clan. It was useful, and Diadem would only admit to himself hypnotizing. Did Soren know that the lure did not only attract humans, but demons as well? Highly unlikely, Diadem thought with a smug expression as he walked toward the village. What alarmed him was Sunny's ability to use a technique that wasn't within his bloodline. Or was it? Diadem thought of Kyubi, his companion of many centuries, and the familiar pang of loss at the thought of his companion's destruction. And it was like a kind of death, Kyubi becoming Sunny, and he couldn't imagine how the human soul had taken over such a powerful demon. However, he planned to find out. Calling the humans with the lure, the ninjas guarding the gate turned dilated eyes toward the copse of trees where Soren was crouched, one moving toward the hum. Diadem, not unlike an animal settling its fur, shook off the strange hypnotic song and passed into the world of humans, and words stolen from the human kaku, words like stalls, merchants, stores full of produce, shops and houses, flowed through his mind. Man, teenager and child, shinobi and civilian. He stopped in the midst of the human flow, black eyes drifting over the humans, the myriad of scents, sweet, sour, bitter, and floral. Human words everywhere, a cacophony of emotions completely different upon each face of human. At one moment they could be happy, and another quickly zip into rage, a trait he thought only existed in animals. Not even Kyubi had such instability. He was a demon that had been very slow to rage, but when in that emotion, he was like a storm, his fury affected everyone. He glanced down at a female who passed, a woman, as the word came to him, and grimaced. Though he did enjoy learning new things, learning the dynamics of humankind was not one of them, not since Kayetsutsun had taught the humans how to harness their chakra, a stupid whimsy that had caused the slow annihilation of their grasp on the earth. Most of his brethren had retreated back to the spirit realm, sharing room with the summons that often bowed to the whims of humans. Most, not even most masters, could travel between the spirit realm and earth more than twice, so once the return trip was made, most stayed. Diadem sniffed the air, sifting through the scents, many whose names popped into his head. He sniffed for Kyubi's scent. Unlike most demons, however, Kyubi had the ability to travel through both realms. He had been a complete enigma to Diadem despite how many centuries they had spent in one another's company. One day Kyubi had jumped up during resting and breached through to Earth, and it was a decade later that Diadem had heard the grievous news. He had cursed Kayetsutsun for his folly that had affected a whole race. Sunny's scent was about the village, the familiar musk that had clued him to Sunny's real identity the moment he had stepped into his territory. However, mixed within it was the almost acrid scent of fresh peppermint. Diadem sniffed about, frowning at the myriad of scents. Sunny must have been running about the village for his scent to be about it so. "You from around here?" a youthful voice inquired, and he turned to look down at a young human male shinobi wearing the standard attire. His dark brown eyes examined the strange indigo-haired man, who walked with a strange grace, fluid, yet oddly at the same time, choppy, like he hadn't quite mastered walking. He had caught the young Chunin's eye because he was a head taller than everyone else. He was thin and wiry, and when he lifted a hand to push hair away from his face he noticed his fingers were unusually long for a normal person. When the man turned and looked down at him, he felt the blood drain from his face. The man's face was a milky white dusted with gray freckles with thin and narrow features, but it was his eyes that stunned the Chunin. His eyes were completely black, they glittered as if filled with tears, and there were minuscule white spots in them that reminded the Chunin of a star-filled night out in the country. It chilled him deeply, and he took a step back as he felt those eyes fall upon him. He opened his mouth, choked on saliva in his throat and shut it quickly. No, the man had a strange accent, but his voice was a soothing honey that flowed through the youth and pulled away the tension and fear. "I am from far away, but I search for a boy with golden hair," full of, his words, though soothing, were hesitant, as if he were rehearsing them in his head as he spoke them. "Feathers. I search for him. Do you know who I speak of?" The Chunin shook his head, actually sorry that he had to do so, but the strange man with the starlit eyes and honey voice seemed unbothered by this and glided away with a smooth nod, indigo spikes bobbing with each step. A strange encounter. Diadem followed the most recent trails that Sunny had made, and was even stunned when he came across the scent of Shikaku, the troublesome tanuki lackey that used to follow Kyubi about. Shikaku had disappeared not a year before Kyubi. He remembered Kyubi had asked if he had seen his minion. The fox demon had seemed puzzled at Shikaku's absence. At the same time, Diadem had thought nothing of it. He wished he had, for as he sniffed the scent, he could smell human within it, a great deal of human. A Jinchuriki. How many of his kind were being imprisoned within the humans and them not even knowing it? When he had descended down from the spirit realm and asked around, all that remained here whispered that the humans had killed Kyubi. Only a water demon who spent most of her time in seas gurgled of imprisonment, but her words had been unclear, and seemed more like rambling than anything else. But when he had seen Sunny, it became quite clear what had happened. Diadem pursed his lips. Who had called Kyubi and Shikaku from the spirit realm as if they had a contract like a summon? What human had the power to call down not just a master, but one of the most powerful masters? For though he had seen many millennia, Kyubi could not even remember a time when he had been a youngling. He had been infinite, imperturbable. It had come to a shock when he had been told of Kyubi's violent defeat. It seemed so uncharacteristic of the fox. Kyubi hadn't just been a greater demon, he had been an annihilator. He'd wiped out any demon that dared challenge him for territory. He held some of the largest land in both realms, and even after his demise his lands remained his. And he had taken joy in clearing out human infestation in his lands long before the humans learned to write. He'd told Diadem once that he could see an awakening in them, an awareness that began to separate them from animals. He'd whispered that when they began to build things, structures, and elaborate dens, places of recreation, that was when he began to wipe them out. They were getting too smart, he had said to him, and they procreate too fast. In 1 century I watched them go from 1,000 to millions. His words had chilled Diadem, because all other demons could not recollect a time when humans could not build things, and the fact that Kyubi could spoke of just how old the fox demon was, how frightening he could be. On a more personal note, however, Kyubi had treated him better than others of his kind, for he was a demon without form, and could possess demons, humans, and animals. He was not looked kindly upon by others, for they feared him, and it didn't help that Kaitsutsun had also been a possessor. But Kyubi had not been a demon who feared, or perhaps he simply hadn't believed he could be possessed by another. Diadem walked into an alley, full of human refuse and humans themselves. They lifted desperate gazes toward him, bodies full of grime, stinking, and smelling of alcohol. It had been so long since he had stolen memory from another creature, and the first time he had taken from a human. One stepped toward him menacingly, and he turned his gaze upon him. The man froze, shuddered, and ran down the winding alley, rasping gasps of fear left in his wake. The other humans, alarmed, hesitated before following him. Diadem smiled and sniffed the reeking air. Above the stench he could smell Sunny, downwind of him. As he came to another exit, he sighted Sunny crouched in an alley across from him, and was about to step out of his alley, when he noticed the masked humans hiding in the shadows about the youngling. They were trying to be still, in that poor way humans did, and no doubt they believed that Sunny wasn't aware of them, but it was clear that the youngling well knew they were there no matter how hidden they thought they were. Sunny was crouched on the balls of his feet, hands resting on his knees, eyes staring at the dirty ground. He was that stillness that only their kind could adopt, that the humans only could try to imitate. While they no doubt wondered what the boy was doing, it was clear to him that Sunny was simply waiting for them to make the first move. "There you are, youngling," he murmured in demon tongue, whispering so that the humans' dull ears would not hear. Sunny's eyes lifted from the ground, that fiery red-orange that he knew so well falling upon him. A flash of surprise, and Sunny lowered his eyes and turned his head so his left ear was in his direction. "You said you were in trouble. Why have the humans surrounded you?" Sunny gave a snort. "It's complicated," he murmured back. Diadem smiled and waited. Sunny sighed, and Diadem could hear the humans whispering to one another in strange staticky voices, despite the fact that they weren't in hearing range of one another. "Target remains immobile." One voice said dully, "Why don't we just bring him in?" Another snapped peevishly, "We were ordered to bring him in unharmed," another said in a commanding voice. "Is anyone else disturbed that we've just spent the better half of the day watching this kid do absolutely nothing?" Another, younger voice inquired. He could tell Sunny was listening to them too. "The snake human, he is an enemy of this village." Sunny's hand moved from his knee and touched a trinket that hung at his neck. "He was the one who gave me this. I thought he had been the reason the humans slaughtered my pack. When he was confronted by the humans of this village about something, I dunno what, he made it seem like he and I were pack or something close to one. The humans did not like that. Now they've got me surrounded. Ah, what to do, what to do?" His hand returned to his knee and began tapping them against his knees. Diadem tilted his head, eyeing the masked humans. He could sense their chakra, calm, a deep well just waiting to be drawn upon. He could take them, but Sunny couldn't, he didn't know enough yet. Diadem pursed his lips. Demonkind was going to take back what Kaitsutsun had given away. Somehow, there is a time for action, and there is a time for words. This is a time for words. Explain your situation to them. It is clear that you are valuable to their leader. Sunny's hands ceased their tapping, his head turned forward and red eyes staring at Diadem a moment, then the tapping continued as the youngling sighed. "All right," Sunny muttered and stood up, stretching his limbs. "He's on the move," the humans in masks murmured. "Let's apprehend him." "Affirmative." Sunny sniffed as he exited the alley and moved down the road just as the humans jumped from their hiding places. Diadem tilted his head and sniffed the air, picking up their scents, putting them to memory. "You're to come with us, kid," one with a mask that looked mysteriously like a frog muttered. Sunny tilted his black feathered head up at the humans, then nodded his agreement. Diadem watched them go, one grabbing Sunny's arm so he could not escape. "No touching." Sunny whined and pulled his arm from the human's grasp, startling the human who clearly did not expect Sunny to carry such force in a single movement. They tightened the circle they had around him, wary as Sunny scowled at them. Diadem's eyes scanned the area before he slipped back into the embrace of the alley. Kakashi stared at the gray stone floor as he leaned against the wall in the Hokage's office, waiting for the Umbu squad that had been sent out to seek Sunny to return with the youth in their custody. His left shoulder ached, and no doubt was swollen or purpled from its very unfriendly dislocation. The Hokage's lined face was pinched. He had never seen the man so distressed before, and it stunned him that of all things, with Orochimaru as a threat, Jiraiya-sama and Tsunade-sama nowhere to be found, one child would make the Hokage seem twice his years. There was a knock on the door, the Hokage straightened from his slump, and Kakashi lifted his gaze from the floor. "Come in," Sarutobi called in his grizzled voice. The door swung open and the Anbu entered, postures stiff, something that did not go unnoticed, and Sunny in the middle, looking incensed by the whole ordeal. His hair, usual littered with colorful feathers, was now graced by smaller black ones. His blue eyes seemed more red-rimmed than usual, perhaps he had been crying, which he found hard to believe. He had seen the boy's flesh charred, meat cooked on his bones, had seen him scream, but had not seen him cry. Perhaps it was merely an illusion, to make the Hokage softer, and he imagined it would work, but Kakashi was no fool. His skirmish with the child had told him one thing: Sunny was a killer, and no doubt he had killed many people. He had told the Hokage this, told him that the seal was gone and that Sunny had used a technique that he had seen Kyuubi use when he had attacked the village 12 years ago. It was the second time he had used that ability harnessed against a human being, Sasuke being the first rather lucky recipient. He had seen the charred remains of ninja who had been unfortunate to be caught by those reaching limbs. He had told the Hokage all this and more, and the man had listened, had heard him. But what was he to do? What were they to do? Sunny stopped in front of the desk. A whiff of peppermint hit Kakashi's covered nostrils as the Anbu backed away. Two leaned against the walls behind Sunny while the other two exited the room, about to close the door, but brief words were exchanged, and they opened it fully to allow Marino Ibiki to enter. Shit. If they were going to interrogate the kid, wouldn't it have been better to have him contained? And could he stand by and watch a child hurt? Kakashi's eyes darted between everyone in the room, feeling his body flush with a nervous tension. The Hokage's face was blank, and Ibiki surveyed Sunny as he walked to the Hokage's side. Sunny was staring at his bald scalp, pitted with the burns, and riddled with the scars, and the child seemed unperturbed by this, merely curious. His strange blue eyes roved over the man, then his nostrils flared, and his head swiveled fluidly to stare at Kakashi. Could the child smell his tension, like he could smell his exhaustion? He looked into the blue eyes, perhaps searching for fear, something that would be very sane at this moment, but he saw nothing but curiosity and a bit of impatience. He supposed it was reasonable in a way. Sunny had not been part of the exam, and had not been introduced to the head of interrogation like the rest of the genin. Sunny's eyes broke from his and turned his head back to the Hokage, released his breath, and became still. The two remaining Anbu tensed, and Ibiki's eyes narrowed curiously. Perhaps he had never seen a live person become so motionless. There was a brief silence that was only interrupted by the whirring of the ceiling fan, then the door opened and two Anbu brought in the chair. The chair was used by the interrogation squad on shinobi spies and missing means. Once a ninja was put in the chair, straps would pop out and strap the shinobi to the chair. Then, every time they tried to use chakra, the seals on the straps would drain them. A drawback of the chair was that many had forced themselves into chakra exhaustion and killed themselves purposefully, so it wasn't used that often. It did tell Kakashi one thing though, that they weren't intentionally going to hurt Sunny, most likely simply intimidate. After all, Ibiki hadn't brought his toys, though Kakashi was left to wonder if by sight they would mean anything to Sunny. "Why don't you have a seat, Sunny?" the Hokage suggested in a heavy voice as the two Anbu placed the chair behind the youth. Sunny had not moved, and didn't respond to the sandaime, which seemed to anger the two Anbu, and one reached out and grabbed Sunny's shoulder, tried to pull the youth back into the chair, but the child's body did not move, as if there wasn't a 190-pound human trying to pull him into the chair. Ibiki looked intrigued. "Son, sit in the chair," Kakashi commanded in a soft voice, and it seemed as if life was breathed into the boy again, and he sat fluidly into the chair immediately. Ibiki sent Kakashi a sharp look just as Sunny spoke up, saying in a clear voice heavy with a threat, "No touching." The Anbu dropped his hand from the boy's shoulder quickly just as the straps zipped out and wrapped themselves around his wrists and ankles. Sunny's pale eyebrows raised in surprise, and he tried to pull his arms up from where they were pressed down against the armrest. The chair creaked and there was a sound of bending metal just as Ibiki stepped forward. Sunny's head darted up to the man and he ceased struggling, the surprise in his eyes being replaced by curiosity. The Anbu who were supposed to guard the door instead returned to stand next to the other two, apparently deeming Sunny more dangerous, and it became clear to Ibiki that the child was, for the seal on the straps had not flared, which they usually do when a subject was using chakra. The fact that Sunny had bent the armrests in a barely mild attempt at escape without using chakra let them know that the boy most likely could rip his way from the chair if he really wanted to. Instead, he leaned back in the chair and let his eyes rove over Ibiki as the interrogator folded his arms and stared down at the youth. "Do you fear pain?" he asked in his gruff voice, waiting for the fear to blossom in the child's eyes. He'd seen more seasoned ninja break out in a sweat, even if their faces remained stoic. Many even managed to hide the fear in their eyes, resigned to suffer unspeakable horrors for their countries. Even if they had not feared pain, when the question was asked, their minds usually came up with reasons to fear it, and they often glanced at his head and knew that he knew ways to make them fear it. People, when seeing his hairless skull, knew that he knew all about pain and it made them fear him, and what he represented. Pain. On the other hand, Ibiki did not like to harm children, and usually never had to go beyond verbal abuse before they cracked. He'd read up on Uzumaki Naruto, had the written report from Hitaki, had read that at times the boy seemed downright malicious in nature. He noticed that the Hokage was anxious, and Hitaki looked like if anything got out of hand, he would protest, despite the fact that he claimed the boy was dangerous. And no doubt the boy was, if by the way he handled the chair said anything. But first and foremost, he was a child, and hopefully, for his own sake, prone to childish fears that would make him crack. If not, well, he wasn't sure there would be anything he could do. He could tell that the Hokage wouldn't allow him to actually harm the boy. He was merely here for intimidation purposes. The youth's lips pursed, as if he was mulling over the question, and there was no fear in his eyes as he looked up at him. "No," he stated plainly, shifting in the chair and yanking his arm as if testing the chair again. Ibiki blinked and rubbed his jaw. No one had ever simply answered the question. Some shouted that they would never tell, others immediately spilled their guts, and some, more loyal and seasoned, simply said nothing. Saying no to a question like that was simply asking for pain. He sensed that the boy wasn't bluffing though. He crouched in front of the boy and stared into those strange blue eyes. The boy held his gaze, no longer seeming curious, just patiently waiting. Ibiki examined his face, looking to see sweat on his temples, but finding none. He glanced at the boy's posture, the set of his thin shoulders, but found no tension there. He looked at the boy's hands, to see if they gripped the armrest until his fingers and knuckles turned white, but they hung limply against the metal. "Why do you not fear pain?" he asked, and he truly wanted to know. The youth's eyes darted from his, glancing around the room, falling on the Hokage and Hitaki briefly before coming back to him. Still there was no fear. "Pain is only temp." The boy seemed to struggle with the word, his strange accent becoming thicker. "Temporary?" Ibiki supplied, and the boy flashed him a brief smile before nodding. Ibiki straightened from his crouch and stared at the boy. "So you are familiar with pain?" The boy's leg jerked in the chair, making it creak again, but it wasn't an attempt to escape or in reaction to his question. Most likely the boy wanted to swing his legs. The boy looked at him and shrugged an aye or nay to his question. "Have you been tortured before?" he asked, but he was sure the answer was no. The boy sent him a puzzled look. "What is tortured?" "I not know that word. Is Japanese your first language?" he asked, wondering on what level of honesty they were working on. This may be easier than he thought. The boy didn't seem like he carried too many secrets. It may just be a simple matter of asking what his affiliation with Orochimaru was, and he hoped this was so, for he did not like to touch children. The child shook his head. "Torture is to cause great pain to another either for information, or revenge, or for pure pleasure." He watched as the child's mouth made the shape of an O, and then quite suddenly, his mouth turned up in a malicious grin, his blue eyes seemed more purple. There was cruelty in those eyes, and though the boy may have never been tortured, he could have been the torturer. "How do you know Orochimaru?" The Hokage's voice startled everyone, though it was clear he wanted to avoid the further subject of torture. Ibiki moved out of the way so that boy and Hokage could see one another. The shit-eating grin had faded, and the boy looked confused again, before his face cleared with understanding. "Snake human?" Ibiki managed not to snort at the name. "Ah, he gave me this necklace a little ago." Ibiki moved forward and stared at the small collection of necklaces around the boy's neck, and immediately picked out the one that was Orochimaru's since it was the only one that had a tracking jutsu on it. He snapped the necklace from the boy's neck, and as he turned to hand it to the Hokage, chaos erupted behind him. It first started with a deep growl that he felt literally in his bones, the bend of metal and an ominous series of snaps. As he turned back there were several shouts from the Umbu, and a voice that shrieked, "That's mine." As a ninja, he should have known better than to turn his back. The boy had gotten close enough to snag the back of his cloak, clawed hands digging into it as he jumped from it, leaving it in the boy's hands, just as one Umbu tossed a kunai and another grabbed his arm. The kunai sank into the boy's spine just at the nape of his neck, coming out the front, and as the other Umbu grabbed his arm, the child swung it, lifting the Umbu off his feet and sent him crashing into the far wall. The Hokage was on his feet, the three other Umbu were getting ready to use jutsu, when Hatake appeared behind the red-eyed child and dropped his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, calm down." The child acquiesced immediately, dropping down on his butt in a display of immediate submission toward Hatake that would have surprised him if not for the more shocking matter of the boy still moving. He should be dead. The kunai should have severed his spinal column, he should be a twitching body on the ground, instead he hacked, and gurgled, and as the Hokage shouted for a medic, he simply pulled the kunai out of his neck. The tossed Umbu stood up from the floor, holding a shoulder and limping, and Ibiki could see the cracked wall, the sheer force in which the Umbu had been tossed. The boy gurgled, blood dripping from his mouth, staining the white shirt as he lifted a hand, red eyes fixed full of rage on him and shouted, "Give it back." There was a stunned silence in the room, that the boy could still even talk. His voice was frightening, deeper than any man's and heavy, weighted with a black rage. Through the blood Ibiki could see long sharp teeth, and the boy's fingers were clawed. "Calm down," Hatake repeated, and his grip on the child's shoulder tightened. The boy's bloody lips pursed over large dagger-like teeth, and he lowered his gaze to the floor just as the door banged open and a medic Nin jumped in, first going to the Hokage, then spotting the bloody child sitting with his legs stretched out on the floor. The medic dropped down next to the child and reached to inspect him, but the boy slapped her hand away in annoyance. "No touching," he snarled, and though his voice was wet with blood, it was back to the child voice. "Sonny, you're hurt." "Let the me dash," the Hokage was saying before the boy interrupted him. "Not hurt anymore," he sent a glare at Ibiki. "Pain is temporary." True enough, when he removed his shirt, his neck was only smeared with blood, and there was no wound. An Umbu whistled behind his mask in disbelief. Apparently for Sonny, pain was very temporary. Ibiki handed the necklace to the Hokage and picked up his cloak from the floor, eyeing the slash marks where Sonny's deadly claws had snagged it. As he put it back on, his eyes fell on the chair, whose arms and legs had been snapped off. It was going to be a bitch to make another one. His eyes fell on the kid again, who was no longer looking at him but at the Hokage, and thought that the boy must have been humoring them, if he could have easily gotten out of the chair. "Why did he give you this?" The Hokage asked calmly, and the medic Nin calmly exited the room, taking the uninjured arm of the wounded Umbu. The guy probably had a few broken ribs along with that arm by the way he was limping. Sonny shrugged, licking the blood off of his lips. "I not know. We met in forest, he gave me the necklace. It was shiny. I like it." He raised his hand, open-palmed. "Give it back. Please." The Hokage stared at the necklace, then at the child, whose hand remained outstretched and wanting. There was a tension in the room before the Hokage smiled gently. "I have many necklaces, even more shiny than this one, and sparkly too. How about I give you one or two of those instead?" The boy frowned, staring at the Hokage, frozen in that immobile way that chilled them, before his hand hesitantly dropped, and the frown cleared away to one of anticipation. "Okay," the boy said, and actually bounced on his butt, like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened, like he hadn't had a kunai through the neck and wasn't covered in his own blood. Hatake let go of the kid's shoulder and took a step back, but he remained behind the kid. The Umbu spread out about the room, one went to check on his wounded teammate. The Hokage sat down and gestured to the necklace that he had placed on the desk before him. "How long ago did he give this to you?" "A month." The boy glanced at the ceiling. "A year, I think." "I'm not part of his pack." "You are not friends with Snake Human?" The Hokage shook his head. "No. Orochimaru used to be a part of this village, but he turned traitor, and now wishes to destroy it." His eyes searched the boys just as his red eyes suddenly burst, a swirl of red, purple, then back to that strange blue that they had originally been. "Would you help protect this village, Sonny?" The boy blinked red-rimmed eyes at the Hokage, then smiled happily, nodding cheerfully. He pushed his feet under him and stood up fluidly, wiping his hands along his bloody chest. I want to be a ninja. I don't trust him, Ibiki said after they had let the boy go, no doubt to clean up the blood. He's dangerous and clearly does what he wants. By the way Hataki, he said, spinning toward the jounin who was leaning against the wall. Why does he listen to you? Hataki shrugged lazily. I suppose he sees me as an authoritative figure. He pushed away from the wall. I've had to threaten him before, and since then he seems a bit more wary of me. He looked intently at Ibiki. I told you he was dangerous, and incredibly deceptive. But then, at the same time, simple. His eyes fell on the necklace. The Hokage nodded. I can't spare the Umbu to watch him. I'll have to get others such as Ebisu to do that. You are training Uchiha Sasuke for the semifinals? At Kakashi's nod he continued. Luckily Jiraiya has shown up, according to the complaints at the bathhouses. Perhaps Natsu and Sunny might seek him out. It seems to me that Sunny enjoys Natsu's company, which is not hard to imagine. Kakashi nodded. He couldn't imagine anyone not liking Natsu, hell, even Sasuke liked Natsu. The Hokage gave a small smile. The best way to attach someone to a place is to have people they care about dwelling in it. I hope that the two boys will become great friends. Kakashi raised his brow. Perhaps. Jiraiya suppressed a giggle as he stared into the peephole, swallowing so he did not drool on himself. Occasionally he would look away to sketch a woman, mostly naked, and then write a scenario next to her image. He loved scenarios. And Konoha had some of the finest ladies, that was for sure. Healthy, supple, vibrant. You have a contract. Jiraiya jumped, startled that someone had snuck up on him and looked up at the strange man. His eyes immediately noticed the blackened ones. He'd seen all kinds of eyes, some pretty, some ugly, and some just plain bizarre, but this one gave him the creeps. He could literally feel the sheer sense of time wafting from them like a miasma. He stood up, and he was face to face with the man, taking in his pale complexion, his spiked indigo hair, his gangly body. He noticed that the man had a strange stillness about him, that the only thing that was moving was his hair, and those black eyes stared at him. This is not a man, that small voice that he occasionally listened to whispered, and he had to agree. This wasn't a man, it was something else, pretending, rather poorly too, to be one. He could barely sense the imposter's chakra, but what he could sense was angry, vicious, and full of malcontent, despite the fact that the soothing voice seemed none of those. What? He asked, moving from startled to wary. You have a contract. The words came from gray lips, and the eyes remained unblinking. For a moment he was confused. Well, sure, he had won with his publishing company, but then he understood what the man or creature was implying. Yes, with the toads. Why do you ask? There was silence, a strange flicker of stars in the eyes, then the creature passed him, fluid in motion, and simply walked away. No sound came from it, not even a passing scent. It turned the corner and was gone. Jiraiya was left puzzled and mildly alarmed. Why had it asked such a question? Jiraiya shrugged and turned back to the peephole. He'd look into it another time. Right now, he had research to do. They took it, Orochimaru said behind the steeple of his hands. Kabuto glanced up from the report he was reading. Sir, they took the necklace. Kabuto stared. You mean the one that you gave to Uzumaki? No, the one I gave to Sunny. Kabuto set the report aside and stared at his leader. His attempt at assassinating Uchiha Sasuke had been thwarted by Hataki, and Orochimaru merely seemed amused at the attempt. Except that he was left wondering, if he had succeeded, would Orochimaru still be amused? What do you think it means? Orochimaru grinned. It could mean many things, Yakushi. Many things. He leaned back in his seat and continued to grin happily. Did you know? It's not wise to take things from demons. It makes them very angry. Chapter 20, Full Moon Howling Part 2. Gaara followed the path, annoyed with his two siblings, who seemed intent on following him about Hidden Leaf, apparently under the impression that at any moment he could perhaps lose his mind and attack the villagers. It was strange, because if anyone dared to ask, he would have admitted that he was more relaxed than he could ever remember in his life. Ever since he had met Sunny, Mother had been quieter, he had less headaches, and things bothered him less. The world felt less empty to him, more real, in a way. Behind him, Temari and Kankuro bickered amongst themselves, oblivious to how much their voices grated on his otherwise relaxed nerves. There isn't a need to train, Kankuro was saying, the exams won't even finish. It will if Uchiha goes last. Apparently it's all everyone seems to care about around here, Temari snorted in reply. Very few of the candidates are even worthy of being called genin. There was a thoughtful silence before she murmured gently, too bad that Lee Kid didn't go up against someone else. I'm sure he would have made the finals real interesting. Gaara's shoulders stiffened at her words. The Lee Kid. Never before had he been tossed around like that Lee Kid had done, though he imagined that Sunny could easily work him over. How strange it was that the thought didn't enrage him in some way. When Sunny had entered the hospital room and had told him to leave Lee be, he had been at a loss. Sunny didn't seem to care for the Leaf Neen in particular, and so he got the sense that Sunny was making plans, perhaps with the other demons in the forest. The idea that there were others like him about, and nearby, made him want to leave the village and investigate, but something told him it was probably best to wait for an introduction from Sunny. Gaara glanced up as he spotted two Leaf Umbu pass by via rooftop and turned a corner, only to stop as a man stood in front of him, and before he could be startled, his muscles seized, locking up and freezing him in place. A pain like none he had ever experienced roared through his head, and he choked on his scream as he felt his mind being pushed back, control of his own body reluctantly relinquished. He was stunned, as his vision became like a tunnel, and it felt like he was seeing everything behind binoculars from the wrong end. Gaara? Temari sounded nervous, a state of being that seemed constant since they had arrived in this village. The demon before him, because he was quite sure that is what he was standing motionless in the exact same way Sunny did, watching him with fathomless black eyes. He was tall and gangly, with pallid skin and indigo hair that rose in spikes and fell down his back, and his pants and shirt seemed as if they had been tailored for someone smaller than he. Who the hell are you? Get out of our way! Kankuro snarled. The demon's head moved slightly, so he could see Kankuro, who was partly hidden behind his gourd. Shikaku, the demon's voice was mellow, soothing, and it reminded him of cream. But it seemed as if the demon was not welcomed by Mother Shikaku, who turned his body toward his siblings and hissed menacingly, "Leave." He felt the sand on his face crack as his siblings backed up. Gaara, you know the plan, right? We're dash. Leave. His body shrieked, and his voice was a higher pitch than he knew. Temari and Kankuro backed up again, shooting frightened glances between the two before they turned and made a hasty retreat. His body, or more like Mother, turned back to the other demon, and Gaara felt a wave of unfamiliar disdain run through him. Diadem, Mother hissed, and the blue demon's gray lips tilted up in response. What do you want? Nothing, came the creamy reply. Not from you anyway. I should have known I would see you here. Anywhere Kyubi is, so shall you be. You're one to talk, Mother snarled. His throat began to ache from the strain of Mother's voice. Diadem smiled, seeming neither annoyed or truly amused by his retort. Mother folded his arms and peered out at the other. Why are you here? I can't imagine why you would descend to this plane. Diadem blinked slowly at him. I would ask the same of you, but I know what your situation seems to be. However, I wish to know how you managed to be placed in such a lowly creature. Mother grunted and crouched down on his haunches, picking granules of sand off his left arm. I can't say. One moment I was free, the next, trapped. Why did you descend to this plane in the first place? Mother shook his head. I don't know, my memory has faded, or perhaps I never knew. Mother grinned. You came looking for Master Kyubi, yes? How do you like his new look? Mother gave a hissing laugh. He doesn't even know you, does he, Diadem? Poor possessor, friendless again. Must be such a lonely existence for you. Diadem's lips pursed, his black eyes narrowed. Be silent, you pestilence. His voice was deeper now, with a hint of otherworldliness as he appraised his body, appearing to find it lacking judging by the curl of his upper lip. I'm sure I can find a way to return Kyubi to his full form with his memories intact. All I have to do is find the human who summoned him. Mother frowned and straightened from the crouch. Summon? Dare the humans have such power over us? I think not. Not unless Kayatsutsun has deigned to shower them with this oh so damning knowledge, not that it would be much of a surprise seeing as he taught them to use their chakra too. Why not power over us? Maybe it was he who taught them how to trap us within human bodies. Maybe he even told them about Res Dash. Silence. Diadem snarled in that guttural, sharp and yet elaborate tongue, bearing sharp black teeth. Never speak of it within human hearing. Ever. Do you understand me? Mother flinched and cowered. Mother cowered. Yes, yes, Mother snapped, and hunched his shoulders. My mistake. He eyed Diadem warily. You surprise me, Diadem, I have never seen you so angry. Is it because Kayetsutsun is your brother? There was a blur, his sand rose to protect him, but Diadem was too fast, and his long fingers gripped Gaara's neck like a vice. They gurgled as the sand tried to grab Diadem, but there was a flash and a wave of heat, and his sand shattered, turning to glass and sprinkling the ground with sharp shards. Diadem's thin face had a bluish tinge to it, veins mapping the skin gathered around his black eyes and gray lips. His face was expressionless, but his eyes promised death. Mother lifted his arms and tried to pry Diadem's steel-like fingers from his throat, feeling his trachea being squeezed, but Diadem was too strong. You did yourself a disservice, Shikaku, separating yourself from your vessel. When I crush this human's throat, I doubt it will be able to heal the damage. The blue demon's voice was still like cream and honey, a strange thing for Gaara to notice as his vision receded, and he knew that Mother was about to go into full form, but he saw a flash of metal. 2 shuriken came at the blue demon, and he released them to snatch the projectiles from the air. Gaara crumbled to the dirt, gasping for air, clutching his damaged throat, and wasn't even surprised that he could move on his own volition. Mother had retreated. When his breathing was under control, Gaara looked up to see Baki standing in front of Kankuro and Temari, both whom looked very pale, with more shuriken in his hands. His eye that was not covered by the half-veil was trained on Diadem as he addressed Gaara. Are you alright? Gaara stood shakily, feeling quite stunned. He had never come so close to death as he had in that moment, and his would-be killer stood as calmly as if he hadn't been about to crush his throat, eyeing Baki and fingering the shuriken that had been launched at him. Baki was looking the motionless demon man over, most likely trying to search out the Hitayate that wasn't there. Diadem's face was no longer blue or veined, his expression relaxed as he turned in one fluid motion and glided away, as if walking on air. Gaara had never been so intrigued in his life. Apparently Mother, Shikaku knew Sunny, who was revealed to be the Kyubi no Kitsune. They had known each other. Had they been friends? No, it seemed more like Shikaku had been more servant than friend. Gaara rubbed his neck and ignored Baki inquiries, thoughts racing. Shikaku didn't like or trust this Diadem, and he felt that he had to agree. There was something that wasn't right with the blue demon. Natsu, came Kakashi-sensei's lazy voice, and Natsu looked up and glanced over his shoulder. His sensei was standing behind him, visible eye trained on the orange book he always had with him. Natsu smiled in greeting. Ah, Natsu, I was looking all over for you. You're surprisingly hard to find. Natsu turned his head back to stare at the line of kunai he had been examining. Hey Kakashi-sensei. How are you? Did you need something? Actually, I wanted to tell you that I found a temporary sensei to train you for the semifinals. His name is Jiraiya, you may not have heard of him. At his mentioning of the name, Natsu spun around, brown eyes wide with shock. Oh yes, I have. How'd you manage to get the legendary Toad Sannin to agree to train me? He drew a critical eye over the Jounin's body. You didn't sell an important body part, did you? Or your soul? I hope you haven't. Kakashi-sensei waved his hand to halt his good-natured lecture. Of course not. The Hokage has decided that he would be ideal to train you, and Sunny as well. Natsu's brows raised in surprise. Sunny was really moving up. Though it shouldn't be much of a surprise, Sunny was special, he could tell the moment the golden blonde had slipped from the forest. He was special, and he was different. This is great. When do we start? Go ahead and meet Sunny up in his room at the tower, and I'm sure the Hokage will summon both of you. Natsu nodded, then turned back to staring at the kunai. How's Sasuke? Haven't seen him since you took him away. Is he alright? Kakashi nodded and gave a small smile. Well enough to fight in the semifinals. He's going up against Gaara of the Sand. Natsu replied with a grimace as he selected a kunai with an elongated handle and walked to the register. That's about as bad as me going up against Hyuga Niji. I don't think either of us has a chance against those two, but don't tell Sasuke I said that. Kakashi-sensei gave a small chuckle. I don't know about that, you have a lot of potential, Natsu. I'm sure Jiraiya will have much to teach you. As Natsu paid for the kunai, he glanced back at his sensei with a grin. I sure hope so. He handed the kunai to Kakashi-sensei. Give this to Sasuke, will you? My, glad you're okay, present. He waved quickly to his sensei as he exited the shop. I'm going to find Sunny now. Take care, sensei. See you in a month. He rushed down the street, waving to people he knew, stopped at the open market and bought more peppermint for Sunny, hoping it would cheer the guy up after Natsu had seen him looking so blue. Then he headed for the Hokage's tower and tried not to brood over the upcoming fight with the Hyuga guy. Natsu liked to think that he was one of the few genin that didn't swim in their own self-delusion. Niji had a year's more experience as a genin, had a Kekkaigenkai, while he did not, and had that weird fatalistic view of everything which he definitely did not have. There was no way he would be able to defeat him, Sannin training or not. On some occasions, he wished he was part of a clan, with an inborn ability that would give him that one bit of advantage that a regular non-clan shinobi didn't have. On the other hand, he was grateful that he really didn't have anyone to disappoint, for while the clans agonized over appearances and honor, his mother and father worried about whether he was coming home safe. Of the two, not belonging to a clan was more comfortable. Besides, look at the Hyuga clan. What a social mess. And sweet little Hinata stuck right in the middle of it. Natsu entered the tower, showing his hitayate that rested on his bicep to the various guards as he ascended towards the Hokage's office, only to realize he didn't know where Sunny's room was. But an unusually helpful Anbu pointed the way, and before he knew it, he was knocking on Sunny's door and waiting for a reply. But none came. He knocked again. No reply. Natsu opened the door and peered inside. The room was a mess. Several scrolls lay on the ground, what looked like pictures, and some casual ninja attire. He was startled to see that Sunny was in the room, sitting on the windowsill, in fact, staring at him with an expressionless dark blue gaze. It was the same expression he had seen him wear during the prelims, and it was clear that Sunny was unhappy. Something must have happened during his stay in the Forest of Death. He was wearing a gray shirt and black pants that had been ripped off at the knees, and Natsu thought that Sunny could use a pair of real shorts if it seemed that was what he favored. Hey Sunny, Natsu greeted gently as he shut the door behind him. Sunny's eyes followed his movements, kind of like the way a predator would, waiting to see what its prey would do next. Are you alright? You look upset. Sunny's lips pursed, and the strange boy turned his head fluidly to the window. Something wavered in his hand, and Natsu peered at it, seeing that it was a picture. He moved close enough to see that it was of a small blonde infant grinning gumlessly at him from a crib. There was only a wisp of blonde hair on the mostly bald head, and 3 marks on each side of the chubby cheeks. Sunny was clearly one of those people who would look the same from infancy to adulthood. Are those your baby pictures? I guess you are from here, huh? Sunny glared down at the picture and loosened his grip on it, and they both watched as it fluttered to the ground, lying face down. I am not that. He pointed at the picture as he hissed, and Natsu saw a flash of sharp teeth. I was never that pathetic little human. With that he hopped from the sill and scooped the picture from the floor, tearing it to pieces viciously. Natsu gave him a sidelong glance, eyes darting about the room and the discarded pictures, and seeing glimpses of a young Sunny in them. Well then, he said slowly, what are you? Sunny's eyes lifted from the carpet and they were no longer blue, but that frightening red, glowing with rage. His thin shoulders squared and his chin lifted, and he replied, quite imperiously, I am demon. Oh. Natsu blinked rapidly at him, trying to take this in. He'd never been in an odd situation like this, and had never met a person who proudly proclaimed that they were such a creature. Okay. So, what's wrong with being human? Sunny scowled at him. Humans is food, and as he said this he picked up a piece of candy and unwrapped it, carefully examining it at eye level. Natsu paled, feeling as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in the room or just around him. What do you mean food? Like this is food, and he popped the candy in his mouth, humming slightly at the taste. For a full 5 seconds, he was stunned, then angry. Well what? I guess I'm just food with a name, huh? Am I food too? Natsu glared, hands folded over his chest defensively. Sunny's head swiveled around and looked Natsu over with a frown, then he waved his hand dismissively. Nah, Natsu not food. What? Too gamey for you. Natsu snapped. This time Sunny turned, looking quite startled at his words. You are my friend. Friends aren't food. Natsu's shoulders slumped, and the rise of anger and adrenaline drained away, making him feel a bit weak in the knees. Oh, well, I guess that's okay. Sunny was picking up the pictures from the floor, stepping on discarded clothing as he moved. Natsu eyed him thoughtfully. Well, you are what you are, Sunny, and I think the here and now is what is important. Sunny froze while bending over to pick up a photo, body turning statue-like in the creepiest way, and looked up at him, eyes unreadable, no doubt thinking his words over, and suddenly his irises seemed to burst, a swirl of blood in his sockets, as they suddenly reverted to that unnatural blue that Natsu had preferred to see. He was smiling a smile he had never seen on another human being, for it seemed to light up the whole room. Sunny hopped over to him and grinned, tossing an arm around his shoulder, smelling of peppermint and other fruity flavors, which told him that the blonde was going heavy on the candy. Natsu is so right, Sunny all but sang joyously, eyes falling on the door. Natsu gave a weak smile, obviously not as happy with Sunny's epiphany. Now he understood those longing looks he had been throwing at Sakura when they had first met, and made a mental note to warn the kunoichi to avoid Sunny if possible. The knowledge that Sunny ate people made him feel decidedly ill. It was a knowledge he knew he would have to let digest before he could really form an opinion. Suddenly the door banged open, startling Natsu, as a small dark blur dashed through and slammed it shut. Konohamaru leaned against the door, taking great gasps of air, before turning toward the occupants in the room, sweating and grinning, holding a large scroll in his arms. "You won't believe what I got my hands on." Konohamaru squealed, then looked surprised upon seeing Natsu. "Oh hey Natsu. Wanna see what I got?" Natsu moved away from Sunny, who was making these almost inaudible trills deep down in his throat as he stared intently at the smaller boy. "You didn't steal that, did you? Where did you get that?" Konohamaru giggled. "From the Hokage's office." Konohamaru was grinning widely as Natsu stared at him in disbelief. "The Hokage's office? How'd you manage to do that?" Konohamaru placed the large scroll on the ground and leered at him. "Sexy no jutsu, baby. And Ebisu-sensei says it doesn't work." The to-be genin snorted as Sunny kneeled by the scroll and poked at it. "This got jutsus in it?" he asked almost musically, still poking it curiously. "Hell yes!" Konohamaru exclaimed, kneeling next to the blonde. Natsu sighed and kneeled down next to them. "I remembered hearing one of my senseis at the academy talking about it, a forbidden scroll. He said there were some powerful jutsus in here, and then I remembered how much you wanted to learn some. So I borrowed it." "You mean you stole it?" Natsu stated flatly. "You are so lucky you're the Hokage's grandson. When the Umbu come in here, they're not going to put you in the chair." Konohamaru scowled. "There's no such thing as the chair." "Oh yes there is." Natsu was staring at the younger child intently, totally missing the puzzled look on Sunny's face. "They put shinobi in it and drain them of their chakra. I heard the interrogation squad has it. They strap you down dash." "Oh that thing." Both Konohamaru and Natsu looked at Sunny, startled to see the vaguely amused look on his face. "What do you mean, that thing? Have you seen the chair?" Sunny shrugged and peered at the forbidden scroll hungrily. "It's a stupid chair. I broke it. Can we look at jutsus now?" What Natsu started to say, but Konohamaru peeled back the strap that kept the scroll tightly rolled and slowly unrolled it. "Wha?" he breathed, and Natsu wanted to agree, seeing the high jounin level jutsus written on the paper. "Which one should we start on first?" Natsu ran his eyes over the jutsus, seeing that most of them were too advanced for one genin and two academy students to try. His eyes fell on a bunshin jutsu, the Kage Bunshin. "Let's try this one. It's more familiar to all three of us than all the others and incredibly useful." He ran his eyes over the instructions, forcing himself to remember it, then quickly rolling up the scroll. "Hey!" Konohamaru whined. "We can't just do one. I'll never be able to get this scroll again." Just then, the door banged open and Ebisu charged in, looking rather frantic, then spotting the startled Natsu and scowling Konohamaru, with Natsu holding the forbidden scroll in his hands. Natsu tried to quickly come up with an excuse, but Ebisu was ready for him. "Kazuya-san. I'm shocked that you would be a part of this." Natsu blushed as he turned his darkened eyes toward his student. "And Konohamaru. Shame on you for using such a disgusting technique on the Hokage." At his word Sunny looked down at Konohamaru. "You must teach me sexy no jutsu." Ebisu sputtered while Konohamaru grinned up at Sunny brightly. "Enough!" Ebisu all but shouted as he snatched the forbidden scroll from Natsu. "I want all three of you outside, at the training grounds now. But now!" Natsu grimaced and headed out the door, Sunny following behind him while Konohamaru grumbled and called Ebisu rude names under his breath. They moved down the hall and Natsu spotted several jounin hanging about the halls, eyeing the trio, then looking relieved and dispersing once they spotted Ebisu with the scroll. Like I said, very lucky that you are the Hokage's grandson, he muttered under his breath to the kid. Konohamaru just glared up at him. They exited the tower and headed for the training grounds, spotting Shikamaru standing next to Chuji in front of the flower shop he knew the Yamanakas owned. Hey Natsu, Chuji called in greeting, and he waved in reply, seeing Sunny's head swivel about to stare at the others. The expression in his eyes were unreadable. He wondered what could be running through his head. Food? The thought made him slightly ill again, and he even tried for a second to look at Chuji the way he imagined Sunny would. Would Chuji be considered good food? Natsu groaned as they approached the training grounds and dug into his pocket, pulling out the bag of peppermint and candy. Here you go Sunny, he handed the bag to the blonde and watched as he gave off a strange warble that startled Konohamaru and took the bag. I was waiting for you to give this to me, Sunny crooned with a slight bounce, before he started popping candy into his mouth at an alarming rate. Ebisu popped up, looking incensed, and without the scroll, glared down at the boys. Now, whose idea was it to steal the forbidden scroll? Natsu looked at Konohamaru while Sunny began to fondle his necklaces, and he noticed that one of them shone in the sunlight quite nicely. Actually, Sunny and Natsu didn't know about anything. It was all my idea. Konohamaru had the gall to look immensely pleased by his declaration. Ebisu's face turned an alarming shade of red that made Natsu take a step back, and Sunny to stare at him. Down! The special jounin all but screamed. Give me 100. All of you. Natsu stood there stunned, but both Konohamaru and Sunny got down on the grass and began to start their push-ups without complaint. You too Kazuya. Natsu sighed and got down on the grass, starting his push-ups and trying to tune out what would prove to be a rather lengthy diatribe by the older man. An hour into the punishment because Sunny couldn't see it as anything other than that being how boring it was to push himself up and down 100 times, which was apparently a much larger number than 30, when the Hokage poofed up next to the strange Ebisu-sensei. Sunny. Natsu, there you two are. You have a meeting with your temporary sensei right now. He turned to Ebisu. I'm sorry that I'll have to take one of your students away for a while. The Ebisu human nodded and nudged those things called sunglasses over his eyes, and as Natsu got shakily to his feet, so did he, fingering the new necklaces that the dying human had given him last night. They were pretty and they sparkled quite nicely in the sun. But he wanted his other necklace back. He glared at the grass. How dare they snatch it from him like that? His eyes drifted upwards under his lashes to glare at the Hokage, nostrils flaring at the scent of one of those umbu humans hiding somewhere. He was beginning to associate them with stale blood and soap, so much soap. Where do we meet him, Hokage-sama? Natsu was huffing, wiping sweat from his forehead. The human youngling Konohamaru was sitting in the grass, panting and staring at the two older humans. He didn't say, but I imagine you'll find him by the bathhouses. The dying human's eyes had an amused twinkle in them while the Ebisu human sent him a scandalized look. What was a bathhouse? Natsu nodded excitedly and grabbed his arm, pulling him along and calling out farewells to the remaining humans. A low roar erupted from the forest, and Sunny froze as he listened to Zorn complain and the birds flee in terror. Apparently Zorn was bored, which he felt bad about. Both he and Diadem had left him in the forest by himself. Speaking of Diadem, where was he? He hadn't seen his new companion since yesterday. He turned his head forward and saw Natsu staring at him nervously. Everything okay there, Sunny? Nervousness smelled good, but not as good as fear, and nothing smelled better than terror, and no matter that he claimed Natsu as a friend, he was still a human, and he smelled good. Sunny shrugged, not wanting to alarm the human, and continued walking. Where are we going anyway? He asked, not sure why they were getting a new sensei. We're going to the bathhouses to meet the legendary Toad Sannin, Jiraiya. Sunny stared at him blankly. He's a very powerful ninja, one of the 3 most powerful they say. Isn't that great? Sunny nodded, yet felt wary. Wasn't the Hokage supposed to be the most powerful? Gaara's scent hit his nose long before he came into his sight, the familiar combination of sand and blood, so he wasn't surprised when they turned a corner and almost walked into them. Gaara was standing next to the 2 same humans that he had first met him with, and their scents were clouded over with fear, sweat pasting their skin. There was another human, taller and darker, with some cloth hanging over half its face, and there was an air of consternation about it. But what really drew his attention was Gaara, who smelled of pain though his face showed nothing, and his eyes fell on the bruising around his neck. He stepped forward, taking in his expression, the hidden pain, and leaned forward to sniff his neck. He reared back, staring at Gaara in surprise. "You get in fight with Diadem?" he asked incredulously, startled that the two had even crossed paths. "Who are you?" the half-veiled human inquired calmly, looking him and Natsu over. Natsu looked up at the human, then turned and looked at him, obviously at a loss of how to respond to the situation. Sunny looked up at the human, but dismissed him from his thoughts. He had more interesting questions. Like why Diadem had tried to crush Gaara's throat. The question rang through his head in a familiar way, not the crushing of the throat but the apparent animosity of it, as if perhaps he knew that the two didn't get along. Which was a weird kind of knowledge. "We really should be getting to our sensei," Natsu was saying urgently, and he was reluctant to agree. "Perhaps we will talk later," he promised in demon tongue, and Gaara nodded, eyes unreadable. He moved on, following the anxious Natsu, and pondered over Gaara and Diadem. Perhaps Diadem was searching for a way to release the demon sealed inside of Gaara. It was a thought that gave him pause, and he frowned, unsure why that suddenly disturbed him. It had little to do with Gaara, as much as it had to do with himself. He remembered that full moon, when Gaara had given him homage, that he had claimed that Sunny was a Jinchuriki too. Sunny pursed his lips. Judging by the horrible fact that he had, at one time, been a human, it must mean that Gaara had been right, and that he was a Jinchuriki. Sunny placed a hand under his shirt and rested it on his stomach. The question was, what had happened to Kyubi? "We're here." Natsu's excited voice interjected into his dark thoughts, and he looked up to see that they had stopped in front of a closed-off dwelling with steam drifting in clouds from it. It smelled of many humans, but a slightly cleaner scent, and he lifted his nose to the air to breathe it in as Natsu spoke with a human and exchanged some type of metal. He followed the human into the dwelling, and was startled to see naked human males wandering about. Not that he cared, but he had been under the impression that the humans didn't like to have others see them naked. Though many of them did have some type of large white cloth covering their lower halves. They exited into a large area full of hot steaming water with humans lounging about. While Natsu looked about for their new sensei, Sunny dipped his foot into the water, then leaned down and scooped some up and slurped it down. It definitely tasted of humans, many tasty humans. Sunny jumped into the pool, splashing several of the relaxed human males from their lethargic places. "Hey kid, you're in the adult pool. You need to get to the kiddie pool," one overweight human growled. Sunny ignored it in favor of slurping up water, stunning several of the occupants. It was like a human, what was the word, stew? A big tasty human stew with a myriad of flavors all mixed together. "Boy, that's unsanitary. Get out of the pool," an older, dying human commanded. Reveling in the multiple flavor of humans, he continued to swallow the hot water and was startled when one of the humans grabbed him. Perhaps that is why he lost control, turning toward the human and biting it deeply on its forearm. The human screamed, jerking its arm away in pain as it tried to move away, only to trip in the water and fall. Sunny growled and grabbed the human by the hair, pulling it up just as another human grabbed him by the neck. With his other hand he clawed at the human's face, reveling in the human's squeal as he released his hold on the demon. Other humans began to surge forward, alarmed by the hollering, while others darted from the water. "Sunny!" Natsu's voice came, and he turned to see the pale-faced human rushing toward him. "What are you doing? Let him go." Sunny realized he still had the human he had bitten in his other hand, by the hair. The human was gripping its bitten arm tightly, hissing in pain and staring wide-eyed at him, while the human he had clawed had managed to pull itself from the water and stagger away. Several other humans had followed behind Natsu, who grabbed his free arm and tried to pull him from the water. "Let him go, Sunny." Sunny reluctantly released the bitten human and allowed himself to be pulled from the water. The humans were shouting at them as Natsu pulled him from the dwelling and back into the street, and he followed the human as they raced out of view and into an alley. His cloths were dripping and the heat of the sun felt good on his cooled flesh. "What the hell was that?" Natsu gasped, turning stunned eyes on him. "I turned my back for a second and you're attacking villagers." He could still hear the angry cries from the steam dwelling and watched as several ninjas strolled over to the shouts. Natsu cursed under his breath and pulled him deeper into the alley. Sunny watched in vague disinterest as the human paced the area with his arms folded across his chest. "Well," Natsu murmured grimly, "I didn't find Jiraiya. He wasn't in the bathhouse. I searched the whole men's side." "What about the female side?" Natsu paused and frowned at him. Well, he can't be in the woman's side, it's illegal. Sunny couldn't see why. Humans had the strangest rules. Natsu was still staring at him. Well, maybe he could be, but that would mean he's a great big pervert. What's a pervert? Natsu's shoulders sagged and he peered out from the alley, looking at the bathhouse. The woman's baths are on the other side and there are chunin about, no thanks to you. He turned to glare at him, but his only reply was to lick his lips, tasting the blood from the human he had bitten. So they waited, kneeling in the alley, with Natsu going over the signs for the Kage Bunshin. After he had explained that it was an advanced version of the Bunshin Jutsu, that the clones were solid, Sunny was eager to try it out himself. So Natsu began to teach the signs to him, though he cautioned against actually doing it because they didn't want to attract the attention of the chunin. 2 hours later, they emerged from the alley and snuck over to the female side, following the wooden fence. As they rounded the corner, Natsu stopped suddenly, staring at a large human crouched in front of the fence, giggling to himself. Natsu sighed and his shoulders sagged again, staring tiredly at the human. Great, he muttered flatly. Sunny peered around him to inspect the human, unsure what it was that upset his companion. Natsu continued forward and stopped beside the human. That's illegal, you know. The human didn't bother looking at them, only waved his hand dismissively. Go away, kid. I'm doing research. Apparently whatever the human was looking at must be interesting. Sunny turned and dug his finger into the wood until it popped through, then peeked inside. There were a bunch of naked human females bathing and milling about. It was pretty much the same as where they had been before. Sunny! Natsu pulled him away from the hole, looking aghast. It's just naked females. No big deal, he said with a shrug and wanted to go see Zorn, who was most likely dying from the boredom that he was complaining about. The white-haired human looked up from his hole and eyed them. What do you mean, just naked females? He stood up and towered over them. Sunny could feel the power rolling off of him, calm and controlled. That, boys, is art. It is beautiful, it's fleeting, it should be savored and drawn. Oh dear, Natsu's voice was faint, and Sunny blinked as he followed his line of vision and falling on a small orange book that the human was holding. It was very familiar. Hey! Isn't that Kakashi leaders, Kakashi? The man was staring at them sharply. You Kazuya and Sunny. The dour look on Natsu's face cleared and he beamed. Yes! I'm Kazuya Natsu and this is Sunny, your new students. The man was staring intently at him, very intently. It was a look he had seen on several humans' faces, and he was getting rather tired of seeing it. He stared back at the human, lips pursed while Natsu glanced between the two of them, most likely becoming used to these awkward moments. Well, I told the old man that I would see you guys, the human said suddenly, glancing at Natsu with disinterest. And I have. Now if you'll excuse me, he turned his back on them and leaned down to peek back into the hole that I have research to do. Sunny frowned, glancing at Natsu and taking in the human's completely crestfallen expression. You mean you won't train us? Natsu sounded stunned. I never agreed to train you, the human didn't even bother to look away from the hole. I just agreed to take a look at you, and I did. Natsu gave a deep sigh and slumped down on the edge of the path, elbows on his knees, face planted in his hands. Well, it wasn't like I was going to beat Hyuga anyway, he muttered to himself dejectedly, staring miserably at the ground. Sunny felt kind of bad for him, and he kneeled down next to him and offered a peppermint candy from his pocket. Natsu took the candy and popped it into his mouth, and continued to stare at the ground. Behind them, the human was giggling to himself and making small scratching noises, and Sunny glanced back to see that he was alternating between doing something with the orange book and peering into the hole. Stupid lazy humans. Why don't we do Kage Bunshin now? He suggested, and that seemed to motivate Natsu a bit, who stood up. That was better. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The young voice called, and Jiraiya felt the cool surge of chakra rise behind him. He glanced back to see the Kazuya kid and Yandame's legacy standing at the curb, trying a Jounin-level jutsu. The Kazuya kid wasn't putting enough chakra into it, using about the same amount as if he were doing a regular bunshin. Uzumaki was standing in front of Kazuya, watching as he created a weak Kage Bunshin that staggered on its feet before it poofed into smoke. He didn't know how to feel about Uzumaki. When Sarutobi had revealed that Uzumaki had returned from the dead, he had been stunned. He would have had an easier time believing that Orochimaru had returned to Konoha in peace rather than the child still be alive. Uzumaki's body may not have been found, but it was easy to believe that he had been devoured whole by whatever had torn the Chunin apart and taken most of everything from his body. And yet, here he was, a beautiful young boy with bright blue eyes and that golden blonde hair his favorite student had. However, just watching the boy sent alarm bells ringing through his head. Maybe it was the way the boy carried himself, fluid, and yet strangely statue-like. He was watching Kazuya with a strange intensity that reminded him of the indigo-haired man that had questioned him about his summon contract. He remembered Sandame's words, that Uzumaki had somehow merged with the Kyuubi. Jiraiya wanted to see the seal for himself, and he wondered how he would get the child out of his shirt so he could examine it. Jiraiya snorted at the thought as Kazuya tried again to create a bunshin while the brilliant blonde stood by and watched. "You need to put more chakra into it," Jiraiya found himself calling out, startling both boys. The Kage bunshin is a technique that needs more chakra than a regular shadow bunshin. Kazuya nodded and his face hardened. Kage bunshin no jutsu. There was a stronger surge of chakra, and a Kazuya clone popped into existence, and it looked as healthy as Kazuya minus the sweat. Uzumaki clapped his hands in apparent delight, and a startling trill erupted from his throat that made Jiraiya stare harder. That wasn't a human sound. Uzumaki leaned forward and poked the clone, then sniffed it. "Smells like Yunatsu." "You and chakra." Jiraiya moved from the fence and strolled over to the boys. "You need to increase your chakra supply if you want to do more than one clone." Natsu nodded as the clone poofed away. He turned to Uzumaki with a slightly weary expression as he smiled. "Why don't you give it a try, Sonny? You've got lots of chakra. Give it a go." Uzumaki, or more like Sonny, nodded and set his feet apart. "Kage bunshin no jutsu." And just as Jiraiya pondered on his unfamiliar accent, he felt the swell of demonic chakra, full of rage, hate, and a foul sense of evil. 10 copies popped into existence, and they hopped up and down in glee along with Natsu's whoop of joy. "Damn, you're good." Natsu was grinning. "You're going to be a genius by the time you become genin." Jiraiya stood by and watched the two boys, or more like the one boy and Kyuubi no Kitsune. That was his chakra through and through, and as he stood there, he thought over Kakashi's report and wondered, almost angrily, at what the Kyuubi was playing at. Who the hell did he think he was? Coming back into the village disguised as a little boy? Disguised as Minato's son? As if hearing his thoughts, the Kyuubi's head turned to him, and the smile of glee faded to be replaced by a cold emptiness. It was a look that said, "Yes, I am here, and there is nothing you can do about it. Sonny, let's go to the training grounds and practice." Kazuya's words interrupted his dark thoughts, as well as the Kyuubi's, whose face cleared as he turned back to Kazuya and nodded enthusiastically. Was Kazuya even aware of the company he was keeping? As both boys moved away, Jiraiya placed his book in his back pocket, eyes following them all the while, and decided he needed to keep an eye on the Kyuubi. "Hey, wait up!" he called, and both stopped to stare at him curiously. "I suppose I could help you out," he said lazily, and Kazuya threw his arms up in the air in another triumphant whoop. The Kyuubi opted to stare at him emptily, body frozen, and he reminded him once again of the other creature that approached him. Jiraiya felt his skin go cold. Another demon had waltzed up to him in human form. Did the Kyuubi know this other one? Was this other one of his servants or ally? What about the Jinchuriki from Sand? Jiraiya paled. From the reports, it seemed as if they were friends. Was this some type of gathering of demons? Soren was bored. This hadn't happened often, it took much to make him bored, and he'd had Spate and Sunny to entertain him most days. But Spate was dead and Sunny was off in the human village, not even bothering to answer to his complaints. Diadem too had not returned, something he was part glad of and part suspicious about. He could imagine what Sunny was up to playing human, but Diadem had only gone into the human village to help Sunny out. Perhaps they were still in trouble. Soren groaned and moved through the trees to find a sturdier branch to sit on. If only he could shape-shift like Diadem, then he too could enter the village. Not that he actually wanted to, but there was nothing like feeling completely useless to make one want to do something they normally wouldn't dream of. He clicked his claws together and thought over how long it was since the two others had left. 2 days. 3. Soren was a pack demon and he would never be ashamed to admit so. He wasn't the solitary type and neither had his brothers. They stuck together for a reason, it was simply nature and necessity that kept them as a pack. He did not enjoy being alone, the lack of company disturbed him deeply. Soren stilled as the sounds of movement began to rush through the trees, and he lifted his head minutely to take in any sense. Human. He smelled humans, maybe 4 of them, heading his way as quietly as a human could manage. And they had the source. Soren pressed himself against the tree, blending in naturally, forcing the fear away as the first human appeared. It was definitely one of the ones who had the source, and it paused on the branches far below him, for he was up in the canopy among the leaves. 3 other humans joined the first, and they conversed with one another in their strange little voices, then dropped to the forest floor. From their sense, he imagined they were male and they were healthy and tasty looking. But he didn't dare attack a human with the source. And then he felt shame. No wonder he was a lesser, he cowered from mere humans. He glared down hatefully at them, and suddenly he imagined that a surprise attack may take a few of them out. They were completely unaware that he was above them, watching as they took objects out of packs, long white things with markings on them. Soren eased down slowly, one brown limb at a time, a silent descent down to them. They chattered on like squirrels, oblivious to him. Soren let the air ease out of his lungs as he hung above them, body tense, then allowed himself to drop down on one human, the others seeing him at the last moment. The human below him was not so lucky as he landed on its back and shoulders. He could hear and feel its spine crumble under him, and it gave a small gurgle as it crumpled beneath him. The other humans were shouting, and a rush of sound hit him, ringing in his sensitive ears, and he was knocked back into a tree. Following the unseen attack, they threw sharp projectiles at him, but he quickly scaled the trees and sank into their embrace, grateful that his skin matched his surroundings. The humans seemed stunned and frantic, sharp weapons out. One of the remaining 3 was gathering up the thin white objects with the markings while the others made their human noises and searched warily about for him. Every once in a while they would glance at one of the humans and make human noises at it, and it would reply sharply, authoritatively he imagined, and Soren knew that he wanted this human's brain. He'd take its language and its knowledge. The humans suddenly dashed away, the source fueling their steps, and he followed, weaving through the trees like the superior predator that he was. He moved higher into the trees and dropped down on another human. It spun as he grabbed its left arm, the other gripping one of those sharp objects. The human's was fast, and as he ripped its arm from its torso, it sliced his neck open. He gurgled for a moment, but did not allow the startling pain and the feeling of blood pouring down his throat to distract him as he pulled the human into the canopy. One of the remaining 2 made to follow him, but the leader had grabbed its shoulder and stopped him. Soren imagined they listened in horror as he tore the human he had in his grip apart, for they were frozen until its screams stopped, having torn out its heart. Then they took off, at a more desperate speed, and as he followed, he noticed that one was dropping small white objects that fluttered like leaves and had markings on them. The scent was acrid, and he avoided them as he followed, for they reminded him of fire. He dropped down to the forest floor, hoping to shake them up, for they kept glancing up at the canopy, expecting him to drop down on them. So it was a complete surprise when he jumped up and snagged one by the leg, tearing it off as he passed up into the canopy. He settled into the branches with the leg and watched as the human fell to the forest floor, screaming in pain, blood squirting out of its hip. The leader dropped down beside its fallen pack member, fear crowding the air along with the scent of blood, and the wounded human grabbed his arm and began to speak desperately between gasps of agony. The leader seemed torn, but the wounded human seemed insistent about whatever it was saying. He watched as the human's eyes hardened, and it pulled out a sharp object and slit the wounded human's throat. His own throat had long since healed. The wounded human spasmed on the floor before becoming still, and the leader stood up, posture stiff, and looked up into the trees, searching for him. Soren gazed down at the rage in its eyes, and he wondered if any of his brothers had given that same look as the humans killed them. Soren dropped from the branches and landed before the human, leg still in hand. The human came only to his abdomen, but it glared up at him hatefully. The fear the human felt had faded, only replaced by the hot scent of rage. The human moved first, jumping back from him and moving his hands together quickly. There was a surge of source and many copies of itself appeared. For a second he felt fear, but then he saw that the copies shimmered minutely, and he remembered that Sunny had done the same thing. It was a trick, they weren't real. But then he had to jump out of the way as a torrent of fire exploded toward him, licking his right shoulder as he leaped out of the way, feeling the familiar burn. It reminded him of Sunny's source, though it wasn't nearly as painful, especially since the wound was healing already. The human spun a 4-sided sharp object at him, and he soared over it, landing in front of the human and swatting it, catching it in the shoulder. The human gave a small grunt as it was tossed into a tree and fell to the ground, but it was quickly regaining its feet. Soren could have hit it harder, but he didn't want a killing blow. The brain had to be undamaged. Soren opened his mouth and sang the lure, hoping to calm the human and put it into a trance, but to his surprise, the human only staggered to the side, gripping its damaged arm, before spitting something at him. The lure hadn't worked. He ran at the human, grabbed it by the throat only for it to poof into a branch. For a second he was confused, then searing pain erupted in his side and he stared down at the human. It had a long sharp object in both of its hand and it seemed to be attempting to cut him in half. Soren hissed and grabbed the hands that were holding the object and crushed them, enjoying the sounds of the human's screams. He released the human and watched as it staggered back, taking great painful gasps of air, fingers twisted and broken, blood and bone torn through the skin. The human seemed horrified by its hands, and it dropped to its knees, staring down at its damaged appendages. Soren moved and stood over human, and it seemed oblivious to his presence. He tried the lure again, and this time it worked. The human's shoulders sagged and it dropped its broken hands to its knees, staring emptily at the forest floor. Carefully, humming all the while, he took hold of the human's head by the jaw, and with the other he dug his claws carefully into the scalp and pulled the skin back, exposing the white, bloody skull cap. The human didn't so much as blink, instead staring peacefully at the trees. Its heart rate was steady and strong, and there was even a slight smile on its face. He sawed away at the skull carefully, not ever having actually eaten a human's brain before but knowing the extraction was a delicate experience. To get a whole language from a creature, he had to eat the whole brain only because it was the surefire way to get it. According to Chakra, certain parts of the brain did certain things and one part of the brain may have nothing to do with language. Thus, a guarantee would be to eat the whole thing. Plus, he'd seen Diadem do it and it had worked. When he had removed the bone from the human's eyebrows to just above the nape of its neck, he scooped the brain out whole and quickly popped it into his mouth, swallowing the large organ quickly. He shuddered at the taste. And before he could form an opinion, pain shot through his head, and with it, knowledge. Sounds that were now words, words that were now meanings, raced through his mind. It was shocking, it was amazing. Soren took a gasp of air, yellow eyes wide. He stumbled unsteadily on his feet and crouched down next to the brainless human body, a human named Hashida Kohei of Otogekure, a strange name. There were shouts, and Soren's head swiveled around, aware that other humans were coming. Damn, Hashida had called for backup and he had left bodies behind. Diadem was going to be pissed. As he soared into the canopy, he heard one of the humans hiss, "I smell blood." He could sense the source about them, or what was it called? Chakra. And he opted to flee, not wanting to fight more of them, and as he retreated, Soren felt a great sense of accomplishment. He felt good and quite superior. He'd taken on 4 human ninjas all on his own. The others would be impressed. Kakashi stopped and let Sasuke rest, watching his brooding student bend over and lean his hands against his legs as he panted. Sasuke was one of the fastest learners he knew, and yes, most of it was due to the Sharingan, but the honest rest was due to sheer determination. He liked students who took their lives seriously, and their occupations. He rather thought he was one of the lucky Jounin sensei who managed to receive a balanced and mild-tempered team. Natsu and Sakura made up for Sasuke's faults. 2 of the 3 managed to get in the semi-finals. His was the only team in the Rookie 9 to actually have more than one. He was proud, and he had a right to be. He grinned cheerful at his exhausted student just as he sensed a presence approach. His eye darted about the area, taking in the rocks and the distant trees, and settled on the figure that glided toward them, a familiar glide that should have been on a smaller person. Sasuke lifted his head as he too noticed the person approaching them, and both sensei and student took in the presence that moved toward them as if it were walking on air. The man was tall and lanky, with spiky blue hair that rose up and fell back to disappear over his shoulders. He wore a pale blue shirt that seemed a bit short and gray pants that stopped just above his ankles, and his feet were bare, covered in dirt. It was his face, however, that was disturbing, for he had no iris. His eyes were a complete glittering black. His face was a milky white with some pale freckles dusted over it that made it seem a tad bit more friendly, and the lips were a curious gray. He moved fluidly up to them, then stopped directly in front of Kakashi, staring into his exposed eye, and of course, Kakashi knew that this was a demon. "You have a contract," came the voice, and Kakashi had a moment to think that if that voice had been put in a pill, no one would buy illegal drugs again. Then he managed to think on the actual words, and for a moment he was confused. What? That a man's head cocked in the exact same way he had seen Sunny do, and Kakashi could swear there were little stars winking out those black eyes. It was chilling. You have a contract. Kakashi blinked several times, and as his mind raced, he finally came to an understanding. A summoning contract? Yes, I do, with dogs. Why do you ask? But the man seemed to lose interest and simply glided away at a very sedate pace, as if he had all the time in the world and he planned to use it up walking. Kakashi blinked several times before he noticed that Sasuke was staring intently at him. What? The next few weeks for Sunny were anything but boring, as he was tossed between Ebisu and Jiraiya, one moment with Konohamaru as his partner, then another with Natsu. Both were interesting humans. Konohamaru had a penchant for getting them into trouble. He had taught Sunny how to do the sexy no jutsu, and together they'd pop up on unsuspecting humans and make the males want to flustered. It was incredibly amusing, because he enjoyed watching them talk around useless tongues, and watched as their faces flushed and their skin heat up. They babbled nonsense and seemed not to know half of what they said, though from the stunned looks Konohamaru would occasionally send them, it must have been something good. He had asked, then what wanna go mess around meant, because he was sure they were using the word mess in a completely different context than what he knew, and it sent Konohamaru stuttering and blushing, until it all became clear that the human male clearly wanted to mate with him. That had taken all the fun out of that though, and he had declined to join Konohamaru in his human mating baiting game ever again, which was okay because Konohamaru didn't seem to want to do it anymore either, judging by the occasional green tinge to his skin whenever he seemed to think on it. Natsu, however, wasn't about getting into trouble, and he took the training with the human Jiraiya very seriously. He was still worried about this fight with a human named Hyuga, who Natsu had to keep reminding him, was the white-eyed human male. Though he didn't mention it to the human Jiraiya, it was what seemed to drive him to work so hard, and he did, increasing his chakra by standing sideways on walls as long as he could or standing on water. Sunny himself had no problem with chakra or its control, so the human Jiraiya was teaching him martial arts to his complete delight. He had babbled to Natsu on how much he had enjoyed watching the green human fight. Rock Lee was his name. Not soon after that, Jiraiya had offered to show him some styles. Unfortunately, he did not like Jiraiya. The large human was incredibly wary of him, and whenever he would use his chakra, he could smell the hate coming off of him. When he looked at the human, he could sense that he wasn't really seeing him, and it took some time for him to realize that the human was thinking of Kyubi. Though he believed that he was in fact a nine-tailed fox demon, he could not say that he was Kyubi. He was Sunny, and though he may know some things that did not belong to his own mind, he was clearly separate from Kyubi. Hell, he didn't even have any tails, which he wondered about, and had spent many hours staring at his tailbone, wondering if he would one day sprout a tail or two. Or 9. When training was done for the day, Natsu would take him over to where he lived, and there he had met Natsu's mother and father. His mother had lovely, silky black hair that he liked to touch, which seemed to please her, and had a plump body. Natsu looked more like his father, having his hair color and build. They were not ninjas. They were both very friendly, and the mother had even given him some colorful clothes, and had told him all the colors' names. He really liked orange. She'd even given him this article of clothing called shorts, that let his legs free, which was quite nice, and it was a vibrant shade of purple, but Natsu had come in and seemed completely horrified at the sight of him. Natsu had argued with his mother, throwing around a lot of words like self-esteem, respect, and a lot of "you're humiliating him" about. Apparently the shorts were only for females, and so was the pink shirt that was so very soft, silk, his mother had said, and he was forced to take everything off. He did manage to keep the orange shirt, which was happily a male's shirt, but he was back to pulling his pants up to his knees. She did give him necklaces and bracelets, which seemed to put Natsu in physical agony, but he refused to give them up, especially the bracelets since Sasuke boy had burned all of his off. He did see Diadem occasionally, though the blue demon seemed preoccupied by something, and had apparently taken to wandering the village. He had asked about Gaara, but Diadem would always skirt the subject or at the most insist that Gaara needed to learn respect. And so he let it go, but mostly because Gaara himself didn't seem to want to talk about it either, so he imagined that the sand demon was embarrassed and that there was no reason to keep prying. So while he spent the days with humans, he spent the nights with Gaara, and they did things like play hide and seek, and rough each other up, though he was careful not to bite Gaara. He was aware that the other didn't heal as fast as he should, judging by the fading marks on his neck, and came to the conclusion that a bite would cause the Jinchuriki more problems than they cared for him to have. He had, to his complete pleasure, gotten to see the end result of his bite, when while heading to the training grounds with Konohamaru, they had passed a large building full of sick and wounded humans. He had spotted the human first by scent, then by sight, the human he had bitten in the bathhouse, and noticed that the man had his arm held up in some type of contraption, and from the elbow down, there was nothing. He had lost his forearm, no doubt having waited too long to remove the dying flesh. The decaying must have spread too deep into his flesh. The man had spotted him, and his face had turned an interesting shade of white, and terror had come off of him in waves. He had fled back into the building, but Sunny hadn't stuck around to see what would happen. The closer it came to the semi-finals of the Chunin exam, the more distraught Natsu seemed to become, to the point that he offered to find the human and kill him for him, which only seemed to make Natsu more upset. That morning, as the sun came up and the village began to stir, Sunny grinned at the cerulean sky, staring avidly at the pale, swollen moon that hung low in the sky. He was absolutely tickled by the fact that this was going to be his first full moon with Zorn in a year. Though Zorn had never participated in the worshipping, Sunny hoped to get him to join them being Gaara and hopefully the mysteriously absent Diadem. He started the morning first by showering and pulling the black feathers from his hair. He'd seen some feathers at the market and had wanted some, but Natsu had said that he needed money to buy one. He'd been unfamiliar with the word, and Natsu had gone into a rather dark explanation of its use. Many of his explanations had been dark due to the coming semifinals. Sunny, he had said, showing him the Ryo, what you're seeing here is the root of all evil. This had stunned him, and he'd stared down at the metal pieces skeptically. Sure, I bet you're thinking, it's just some metal and trees, but I assure you people will lie to you, cheat you, steal from you, betray you, harm you, and even kill you, for this stuff. People do terrible things in the name of money. This stuff makes the world go round. It's the universal language, it's the all-worshipped religion. You watch out for this stuff, you hear? He'd nodded, only so he could move on to another subject that wasn't so weird, and had felt awkward when Natsu had given the money to him. Like he'd actually wanted to use it after all of that. But he'd pocketed it, and now planned to buy one of those large colorful feathers, that shone blue and green and looked like there was an eye in the middle. He took a shower, which he enjoyed greatly, then dressed in his new orange shirt and brown pants, that he rolled up to his knees, then headed out into the village, beaming occasionally at the moon. When he arrived at the stall, there were many of them, and purchased 5 in all, then went into an alley so that he could decorate his hair. He found that the stems were too long and had to cut them so that the feather was much shorter, and when he left the alley, was pleased by the occasional reaction by passing females. Then he went to Natsu's dwelling and climbed up the side of his dwelling and peered into the window, expecting to see Natsu rummaging around, but instead the human was laying in bed with something large and red settled on his forehead and something sticking out of his mouth. Sunny pushed the window open and slipped inside, noticing that Natsu opened an eye a sliver to peer at him before closing it. Ah, the human was ill. Well, at least he smelled ill, and his body temperature was high. He moved over to Natsu's side and sat down on a chair that sat at the bedside. What happened, Natsu? He asked, but turned his head toward the door as he heard Natsu's mother approach the door and enter. She saw him and smiled. Sunny, wow, look what you did to your hair. I don't know how you manage to pull things like this off, she complimented as she touched one of the feathers. Peacock feathers. Wow. Natsu, you should try this sometime. Natsu's only reply was a groan. What's the matter with Natsu? He asked the human female. She sighed and removed the strange red object from Natsu's forehead, and Sunny heard it slosh with what appeared to be water. Natsu's worried himself sick, that's what. All this nonsense over some ninja exam dash. Snot nonsense, Natsu muttered around the strange clear stick in his mouth and his mother pulled it out and looked at it. Oh dear. 102. Darling, you're sick. You'll have to stay in bed until you're a lot better. And there was a look of glee on her face as Natsu gave out a long pathetic moan. She looked at Sunny and gave a sympathetic smile. Sweetie, I'm sorry but you're going to have to leave. Natsu could be contagious and I don't want you to get sick too. Sunny looked at Natsu, who opened an eye to peer at him again, then groaned at his inquiring look. Sunny shrugged then hopped over to the window. Tomorrow then, he said, then jumped out. He decided to go look for Konohamaru, and after wandering about the village, managed to find him sitting with his 2 small human friends Udon and Moegi. Both stared at him in awe while Konohamaru stared dejectedly at the ground. Sunny then noticed that his foot was wrapped in white stuff. What on your leg, Konoha? It's Konohamaru. He moaned and finally looked up at him. "Oh Sonny, it's terrible." He all but wailed. "I was pulling the perfect prank when Ebisu-sensei found me, and I tried to hop over this fence but it was rotting and it broke, and I broke my ankle." Sonny stared at the foot that was wrapped up. Why'd they do that to it, though? He wondered, but Konohamaru apparently had some type of answer. "They took me to the hospital but they said that they won't heal it." Can you believe that? "It's some kind of sick punishment to teach me about not playing pranks." And he continued on with his diatribe until Sonny lost interest and he wandered away in search of Diadem, who he hadn't seen in days. It turned out though, that as he traveled about the village following his scent, that Diadem had been all over Konohagakure, and all the trails seemed strangely confusing. After the frustration of not finding his blue companion, Sonny found a dog to eat and then settled into a tree to do some human watching. Then, an hour past noon resting came and he stayed there, eyes lazy upon the beautiful moon, and remained unnoticed by the humans. When resting lifted the sun had dropped to the horizon and the moon already shone brightly, Sonny dropped from the tree and headed toward the tall dwelling he knew Gaara was staying. He had enjoyed the last full moon with his sand companion, and hoped to introduce him to Tsoren, who, as he thought of him, had been rather quiet these last few weeks. He scaled a few dwellings and spotted Gaara sitting on the rooftop, cradling his head, face twisted in pain. As Sonny approached, Gaara's head snapped up, and desperate eyes fell on him. Sonny stopped at his side and looked down at him. Immediately the cracks on his face began to fade, and his hunched shoulders loosened. Gaara wiped his bruised eyes and blinked wearily up at him. "I don't know what it is about you that takes away the pain," his raspy voice whispered, and he shook his head as if to clear away the cobwebs in his mind. "Come on Gaara," Sonny beckoned excitedly. "It's a full moon. Let's go into the forest and play." Already he felt the intense call, the pull in his blood, and he was eager to head into the forest. Gaara got to his feet and looked inquiringly at him, and he pointed in the direction of the forest. "Go there, and you'll meet up with Tsoren. Don't make him mad. I'm going to look for Diadem, and then I'll meet you there." Gaara nodded and leaped away, heading for the forest. Sonny watched him go for a moment, and as he turned to search for Diadem, spotted a human following Gaara silently in the shadows. Sonny frowned and sniffed the air, but he was upwind and he could only smell wood, smoke, and many of the scents that dwelled in the village. But the human looked vaguely familiar, and it was following Gaara. Jumping down from the dwelling, Sonny dashed quickly and silently around dwellings and fences, slipping through the shadows until he had caught up to the human, and in one sniff managed to recognize the familiar scent. It was one of the humans from the prelims, the one that had fought the fat one. Along with his scent he could smell malice and the intent to kill. Sonny's eyes bled to red and he felt his nails harden. He wasn't going to let a human attack one of his own again. Gaara crossed the training grounds and disappeared beneath the dirt, and Sonny could feel that the Jinchuriki was heading for the walls, no doubt deciding to go under the wall instead of going over. "Damn!" The human ground out, stopping at the spot where Gaara had disappeared. Sonny rushed him, claws out, prepared to rip the human apart, but he sensed the attack and leaped out of the way, at the same time throwing kunai at him. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped as Sonny dodged the kunai. The moon was higher in the night sky, his blood pumped faster, and his vision began to sink into the reds and oranges. He growled deeply and jumped at the human just as it shouted Kayamaizen no Jutsu. And he swung his arm at Sonny. Pain exploded in Sonny's left ear, and he stumbled and fell into the dirt, feeling blood trickled out of the ear, and a loud ringing echoing throughout his head. He jumped to his feet as the human threw a shuriken at him, but colors blurred together, and he felt completely dizzy. The shuriken sliced his arm as it passed. The human leaped at him, kunai in hand. Sonny summoned his chakra hands that burst from the ground and snatched at human. But he missed. The human collided into him, two kunai digging into his chest and puncturing his lungs. They fell back into the dirt, the human on top of him, and the chakra hand fell into the ground, disappearing. He got a good look at the human, when his eyes finally stopped crossing, and the hearing in his ear returned, noticing that the human had his face completely wrapped except for his left eye, that gleamed triumphantly at him. Blood was filling his lungs, but he grinned up at the human, whose eye widened in response. "I got you," he gurgled, and grabbed the human's biceps and squeezed, hearing the immediate crack of bone, accompanied by the curling scream. At the same time, there was a surge of chakra from the human, a high keening sound, and pain erupted in both of Sonny's ears. He tossed the human off of him, and got to his knees, eyes rolling in his sockets. His hands searched his chest, found the embedded kunai, and pulled them out, feeling his lungs and chest heal immediately. He coughed out some blood and turned his disoriented head in the human's direction, and was chagrined to see that the human was attempting to escape. Sunny lifted a hand in its blurry direction and felt his chakra hand race through the earth, bursting forth and grabbing the human's foot. The human cried out as he fell, and the chakra hand began to drag him back towards the demon. Sunny's vision righted itself, his ears stopped hurting, and it came to him that the human had done something to his ears, something that caused his vision to scramble, and the strange disorienting feeling. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he hissed, making the signs, and 3 Bunshin popped up. They grabbed the human, who struggled pathetically, not being able to do much with 2 broken arms. Sunny wiped the sides of his face that were covered in blood and glared at the human. "Why were you following Gaara?" he asked, allowing his voice to revert back to its usual state, which was very deep and heavy. Any courage that was left in the human drained away, and his pain-filled eye widened in absolute terror. He seemed to be trying to form words, but was apparently unsuccessful. The 2 Bunshin holding him up by his broken arms squeezed, and the human screamed in pain. "I was going to kill him," he screeched, and they loosened their grips on his arms. "Why?" Sunny reached out and cut a piece of the cloth on the human's face, and watched as it unraveled and revealed a plain human face with a hairless skull. The skin was pallid and lined with pain, both eyes darting in their sockets. "I was going to take his place in the semi-finals so I could defeat Sasuke," he gasped, sweat lining his face. One of the Bunshin sent him an incredulous look. "Sasuke boy? Silly little Sasuke boy, Sasuke is nothing," he hissed, and the other Bunshin made a face of disgust as the human urinated on himself. He leaned forward, about to say more, when he smelled it, over the stink of piss, and the lovely fragrance of terror, snakes. Sunny reared back, red eyes focused on the human. This was one of Snake Human's pack. What was his name? Orochimaru. At the same time, the 3rd Bunshin, that had been standing behind him and watching to make sure no one saw them, lifted its head and sniffed the air. Sunny's head swiveled around. The Snake Human's pack member with the gray hair was nearby. Sunny took off in its direction, leaving the disposal of this human to his 2 Bunshin. He was sick of this Snake Human. It had gotten him in trouble deliberately, and now its members were threatening his own. It was time to have a violent talk with one of his members. By the time Kabuto was aware of danger, it was almost on top of him. He had been heading back to his home, plans for the siege comfortably in place, when Uzumaki and a Bunshin dropped down practically on him. Kabuto weaved out of the way, dodging a claw that slashed the wood near his head. He kicked the Bunshin, knocking it through the window of a house, then sped down the street, moving away from the villagers. The small blonde child followed quickly behind him, and it was like being followed by a monster. Some of the sounds coming from the creature's throat were frightening. He didn't know what had caused this sudden attack or if it was simply that the child had lost its mind to the demon, but he was eager to get away, remembering the technique Uzumaki had used on the unsuspecting boy weeks ago. As Kabuto entered the training grounds, his eyes immediately fell on 2 more Uzumaki Bunshin, covered in blood, with arms and legs in their hands. There was the torso of some unfortunate person lying between them, and they both lifted their heads, haloed by the light of the moon, crimson eyes falling on him. He spun just as the original reached him, palmed his shoulder, severing the nerves, and watched as the arm flopped to his side. Uzumaki stopped and blinked down at the arm, tried to lift it again, and it moved. Kabuto's eyes narrowed. The nerves must have healed almost immediately, which said that Uzumaki had almost instantaneous healing abilities. There was a rush of demonic chakra, and Kabuto leaped from the ground as a large red-clawed hand burst from the grass and followed him into the air, claws spread to grasp him. Quickly he kawamari'd out of reach, landing behind the demon boy and hit him at the nape of the neck, severing the nerves along his spinal column. Uzumaki spun towards him, but flopped to the ground, body spasming and twitching, and the large chakra hands dissipated. But the fight was not over, for the 2 Bunshin had raced toward him and attacked, a flurry of feet and claws, and it came to him that they were actually using a martial arts style, though it was so choppy and unskilled that he couldn't tell which one it was. He quickly dispatched both of them, but to his chagrin discovered that Uzumaki was back on his feet. This boy was unstoppable. Uzumaki bared dagger-like teeth at him and began to walk towards him. "Tell your master that if he wants to play the game, I will play." The boy, no, the demon, for the voice that the creature revealed to him could not possibly belong to a human being, stopped 5 feet from him. I will outlast him and he will play with his life. The demon jerked toward him, but Kabuto hit him in the chest, severing an important artery connected to his heart. The demon staggered back and grabbed his chest, and froze completely, as if he had been turned to stone, eyes fixed and unmoving. But in that same moment, Kabuto was stunned himself, for as he had hit the boy in the chest, he had gotten a flash of the inner workings of Uzumaki's body. He'd seen his heart, his lungs, and he had seen what looked like Uzumaki's stomach. Though, the stomach didn't look like any stomach he had seen on a human, because it was connected to a web of thick veins that spread throughout the demon's body, from head to toe. And after that, there was nothing. No liver, no small and large intestine, no kidneys, no bladder, just the coils that came from his stomach, and they were veined with chakra coils, thousands of them. Uzumaki's belly was mostly empty. Uzumaki suddenly moved, as if life had returned to him and moved away fluidly, then broke into a run, heading towards the walls and most likely into the forest. Kabuto watched in wary silence as a man followed him with the same fluid grace, only stopping to pick up the unknown body, and to glance at him, and he was captured by ancient black eyes. Then they too were gone, and both disappeared over the wall. Kabuto was left on the training grounds, wishing that he could get his hands on such a body to explore, and he rubbed his hand against a burning on his right arm. He frowned and looked at his arm, and was startled to see a rather angry bite mark. When had Uzumaki managed to bite him? He stared at the burning wound, and noticed the black and purple coloring, pressed healing chakra to it, and immediately felt the decaying flesh. Uzumaki's bite was deadly. Scowling, Kabuto pulled out a kunai and painfully removed the infected flesh, hissing silently in pain. When it was all removed, he healed the damage, and his arm ached no more. Then he dug into his pocket and stared at Uzumaki's card. The list was getting longer and longer. Sunny stopped when he had reached the safety of the forest and had both Gaara and Soren in his sight, both of which were staring warily at each other. Diadem stopped on a branch beside him and stuffed the body and its limbs into the nook of the tree, before frowning down at his blood-stained clothing. A pity, he sighed, and Sunny wanted to agree, seeing that his new favorite orange shirt was not only covered in his own blood but also had tears where the kunai had entered. What happened? Gaara asked, moving over to him. Sunny shrugged and shook his head, instead scaling up into the canopy and emerging from the leaves. The full moon bathed him with its cool light and he felt a wave of content. Below him, he could hear Soren speaking of the 4 ninjas he had killed, and he was pleased for his brother. Gaara followed him up and frowned. I don't like full moons, he rasped. Machikaku is always agitated on full moons. It's because he wants to dance, Sunny whispered, eyes bleeding to blue. He wants to dance, and sing. He opened his mouth and sang the lure to the moon, and Gaara descended slowly, feeling his limbs grow heavy. He sank down into a tree, and struggled to keep his eyes open, watched, dare he say, sleepily. As the blue demon Diadem removed his clothes, folding them rather neatly, then flashed into a small blue flame, zipped through the branches and flashed in circles around Sunny's head. The tree shuddered around him, and the brown demon named Soren settled next to him. I heard that the greater demons were always affected more by the full moons than us lesser demons. I guess it's true. Gaara's eyes fluttered, then fell shut, and he curled up to sleep, something that used to terrify him, but Shikaku was silent, and Sunny's angelic singing was so relaxing, and that's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.